Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Teku Andrews and I will be your host for today. So we'll be doing a very quick webinar. Probably will take us about 30 to 45 minutes maximum, depending on the number of questions we get at the end. But mainly the purpose of this is to give you a very basic introduction to British parliamentary debate, while we also introduce you to the Hong Kong Oxford Schools regional round and the pathway that you have to eventually making it to the Oxford Schools Finals Day competition, which will be held in Oxford in March 2025. So there's a Q&A section that you can see on your screens, so you can always put any questions that you have there in that Q&A section. Definitely I would get to see them and I would answer them as and when fit. Occasionally I would pause to check there, so please type out your questions whenever you have them. And at the end, definitely if there are any key questions, I would also give a few more minutes for you to ask them. So let's get going. If you know anyone who registered who is supposed to be here, kindly give them a quick text and let them know that the webinar has started. And so this webinar is being recorded mainly for purposes of documentation, but also so that we'll make it available to you. And if later on you need to refer to the webinar for any clarifications, you can always have access to it to do so. So after the webinar has ended, you would receive emails, hopefully tomorrow or on Monday, with much more details. But also one of the things that you'll be receiving is the link to the recording for this webinar, and you get all the details that you need in there as well. And so just so you get to know me, because I'm hosting you and you should know me before we proceed, I am Debate and Competitions Lead at Sea Change Education. I'm from Ghana, and I have 6 years of debate coaching experience. I'm a Doha Debates Ambassador and currently a mentor throughout the year of 2024. I've won several competitions, very, very high university-based competitions, as you can see them there. IIT Bombay, I've won it twice, Western InterVarsity Debate, Oxford Debate Open in 2020, the summer edition. I've been semi-finalist of the World Universities Debate Championship. And the competitions that I've won and won speaker awards that are countless. But obviously the webinar is not about me. So that's just for you to know me and to know a little bit about me before we go on this 45-minute journey where we talk about British parliamentary debate. And so our outline will be brief, just 5 key things that we'll be looking at. First, we'll talk about an introduction to Sea Change Education, because obviously we are hosting you on this webinar. It would be unfair for us not to tell you who we are and what we do. But also, right after that quick introduction is done, we'll then move on to the main reasons why we are here. We'll talk about what British parliamentary debate is. We'll talk about the BP debate format. We'll talk about speaker order, speaker roles, and what you call point of information or POIs. And then we'll then talk about the Sea Change pathway to British parliamentary success, where we have some camps, we have the regional competition, then we have the finals day competition in Oxford. So just stay with me. This will take very, very little time of yours, but you would get so much information from it. So I hope this is worth your time. So for the introduction, for those of you who have never heard about Sea Change Education, we are a communications academy, mainly focusing on debate, public speaking, and model UN as well. And so we also do reading and writing for very basic individuals who want to learn the English language in a much more professional sense. But we take students from the ages of 5 to 18, and most of our classes are based online. So regardless of where you are able to sign up for Sea Change courses, and you are able to take them as well. For competitions that we run, we have a public speaking competition, mainly for primary school and some secondary school students as well, which is the AIM Cup competition. But we also run our famous IPDC, which is International Parliamentary Debate Competition. We run the 5th edition this year, and so next year will be its 6th edition. We have the Sea Change Model UN, which we run in partnership with City University here in Hong Kong, which is usually in person. And then we have much more debate-based competitions, which I'm sure those who are here are interested in. We have the Oxford schools as well, We also run other ones such as the US Nationals, and then there are model UN competitions externally that we go for, such as Cambridge and Yale. So this is just basic introduction to sea change, and you can join us. Maybe at the end, I'll just give you a quick look as to how you can reach out to us if you want to enroll on any sea change programs. So, yep, maybe you could take a pause before we start the British parliamentary discussions. Just one thing you could do is just scan on your screens any of the QR codes that you see here for your favorite social media platform. If you are active on Instagram, you can follow us on Instagram. If you're active on Facebook, please do so. But you can also check out our website as well. I'm just giving it 5 seconds for anyone who is interested in scanning them to be able to do so. If you want to take a screenshot and probably scan them later, that's also absolutely fine. And so please do so, and would expect to see you and give you much more updates about everything that we do on our social media platforms as well. And so now I think it's time for us to start. What is British parliamentary debate? In my experience, it is the debate format I was introduced to in a form of competitive debate experience, and it's one of the most exciting debate formats that you would get to do. And as we go through the definitions and the way in which it works and the format and the rules, you'd get to appreciate why it is that exciting compared to some other formats. Don't get me wrong, all the other formats have their very unique things that they teach you as a debater, but British parliamentary also has this unique thing that it teaches you as a debater in your journey to develop to become a great thinker, a great speaker. And so I would explore why British parliamentary debate should be a good thing for you and why you should explore it. But as the name goes, it comes from the model that is used in the British Parliament. And so the style is one that seeks to depict, mimic, or copy what happens in the British Parliament, because as we all know, Parliament, usually what we have there is a lot of discussions, a lot of debates to determine laws and rules that govern our countries. And so people who developed the British parliamentary debate format looked at how the British Parliament operates, picked that model, and decided to create a debate format based on that system, and then encourage debaters to use that format to learn various skills. The key thing about the British Parliament is that they have what we call two houses. They have the upper house and the lower house. The upper house is usually called the House of Lords. They are not the ones who do a lot of debates, but the lower house is usually called the House of Commons. Those people do a lot of debates. And if you know anything about Britain, you would also know that they have a monarchy system, right? Where there is the king, previously was Queen Elizabeth, but now there is King Charles. And so they have a royal family that represents them in some form of authority. Now, what this means is that for the lower house, which is the House of Commons, those are the people that you vote for when you go to Britain. So they form the lower house. The upper house are the lords and kings and royal family members that rule the various regions in Britain. So they form the upper house. And so it was first adopted by UK universities because that's where the model comes from. And now it is the model that officially is debated at the World University Debate Championship. And so a lot of you who would be going to college, who would want to pursue debate as a competitive sport, a lot of you who would want to participate in the World University Debate Championship, which is the pinnacle of debating at the university level, you'd want to know the British parliamentary format right from now, because that is the format you'll be using when you go to college for debate, right? So it's very, very exciting. So some famous British parliamentary competitions, we have the Oxford schools, which we'll be talking about because that's what we do at the senior high school level or at the high school level. We have the Cambridge British Parliamentary online. You can check them out as well. And then we have the World Universities Debating Championship, which is more like the World Cup of debate for the university level, and they use the British parliamentary format as well. And so don't forget, you can always leave questions in the Q&A section as we go along, and then I would answer them appropriately. So now let's talk about the BP format. Now, this format usually confuses people because it's a little bit complex, but it's very exciting. And so that's the good thing about it. So let's walk through the format. The process I've created here is to make it as simple as possible for you, and you'll be able to easily understand exactly how the format works. And so in the British parliamentary format, it mimics a British parliament, like I said. And in every parliament, we know there's those on the government side and those on the opposition side. So in every British parliamentary debate as well, there's what you call the government bench and the opposition bench. Now, the government bench is what you typically call proposition side in some other debate formats. So let's say in the Asian parliamentary debate format or in the American parliamentary, you usually call them the prop or the proposition, and you'd call the opposition maybe the con or the opposition. In British parliamentary, we call them the government, which are those supporting the motion, and then the opposition, which are those opposing the motion. Right. So in British parliamentary, if you hear anyone saying the government side or the government teams, usually they are referring to the proposition teams who are the ones supporting the motion. And more importantly, aside us having two sides, which is government and opposition, each side is further divided into the opening or upper house and the closing or lower. Okay. So remember we said the British Parliament has the House of Lords, which is the upper house, and the House of Commons, which is the lower house. And so in British parliamentary debate as well, they mimic that system, which means on the government bench, there is the upper government, or what you would call typically the opening government. And then we have the closing government as well. And then on the opposition side, you also have the opening opposition and the closing opposition. Okay, so what this means is that in British parliamentary debate, there are four sides. There is the opening government, there is the opening opposition, there is closing government, and there is closing opposition. So there are two sides, which is the government and the opposition. There are two stances for the debate, and then there are four different sides of it, the upper and the lower, or the opening and the closing. So that is basically it, but let me give you a visual depiction of it. So if you look at this, let's say this is a room in which we are having a British parliamentary debate. There are two sides to the debate, which is the government side and the opposition side. Now, on the government side, you have the opening government, which is this team, and you have the closing government, which is this team. And then you have the opening opposition, which is this side, and you have the closing opposition as well, which is this team. And so this part is a little bit, is probably the side that tends to confuse people a little bit when it comes to British parliamentary. But trust me, once you get to understand it, it's much more entertaining and a very exciting debate format. And so what this means is that you have two different sides supporting the motion, but they are still competing against each other. And there are two different sides opposing the motion, but they are still competing against each other. And so, unlike other debate formats where it is just prop and op, and you are debating against one team and you are only competing to beat that one team, in British parliamentary, you are competing against all the other three teams. So if you are opening government, you are competing against opening opposition, you are competing against closing opposition, and you are competing against closing government as well. And this is what makes it exciting, which means you are competing against three teams this time round instead of just one team in other formats. And that gives you the responsibility to learn a lot of things, but also to think of very, very key strategies to help you win debates. And that is what makes it exciting. And so each side is represented by a team. And so opening government is a team, opening opposition is a team, closing government is a team, closing opposition is a team. And that means that the same way we have four sides in a British parliamentary debate, there are also four teams in a British parliamentary debate because each side is represented by a team. So now that we know this, we can go to the speaker roles and speaker order. I would just quickly check if there are any questions in the Q&A section. I can't see any so far, so that would be great. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to drop them there. And so for the speaker order, mainly what we are going to look at is the teams that we've just discussed, which are the opening government, the opening opposition, the closing government, and the closing opposition. Which speaker roles do they take up? Because we know that generally in debate formats, for instance, There's the first proposition speaker, there's the first opposition speaker, maybe there's the second proposition speaker, and there's the second opposition speaker, and on and on and on. So what do these things look like when you come to the British parliamentary side of debate? Okay, because you want to understand that part as well. So there are four teams, like I quickly said. There's the opening government, there's opening opposition, there's closing government, and there's closing opposition. Now, each of these four teams are made up of two speakers or two debaters. So if you are doing a British parliamentary competition, it is just you and your partner, so two debaters. Unlike other competitions where maybe there are three people on a team or there are four people on a team, in British parliamentary, there are just two people on a team. So in opening government, you have two people, in opening opposition, two people, in closing government, two people, in closing opposition, two people. There are no reserves and there are no backups. So it is just the two of you who get to do that competition if it's a British parliamentary competition. And so what this also means is that now we need to understand what are the roles of those two people in each of the teams, right? And that is very, very exciting. So in opening government, the first speaker for opening government is called the Prime Minister. The second speaker for opening government is called the Deputy Prime Minister. Obviously, like I said, this is mimicking the British parliamentary. So if you put your mind to it, it will be very easy to understand. The British government usually have a prime minister. So if you are the leader of the government or the first speaker of the government side in a British parliamentary debate, you are termed as the prime minister, and your second speaker is termed as your deputy. So that is your deputy prime minister. Okay. So on opening government, there's the prime minister and the deputy prime minister who make up the opening government team in a British parliamentary debate. On the opening opposition, there is the leader of opposition and the deputy leader of opposition. So the leader of opposition is obviously the person who is opposing everything that the government says. And so that's why you are called leader of opposition. And the deputy leader of opposition is your partner who is speaking after you, right, as the deputy leader of opposition. In closing government, the first speaker is called the member of government, and the second speaker is called the government whip. A whip means that somebody who is there to convince judges or convince people to vote for their team. So usually we say that the whips are people who have the last say. And when we look at the speaker order, it would make sense and it will become clearer. But there are people who have the last say, and so they have so much influence in convincing the judges because their speeches are the last things that judges hear. And so whips are very, very powerful speakers if they do their speeches well. And if you're in closing opposition, you have the member of opposition and the opposition whip. So if you look at it, it's quite easy to remember the names. In opening government, prime minister, deputy prime minister. Opening opposition, leader of opposition, deputy leader of opposition. Then when you come to the closing house, there is member of government for closing government, and then government whip. And then you go to closing opposition, there's member of opposition, and then opposition whip. So there's a lot of similarities in both houses, the opening and then the closing. So it makes it easy for you to be able to remember. Okay. And so mainly these are the speaker roles that you see there. We'll go through the responsibilities of these speaker roles, but I just wanted to highlight a few things for you. First is that you can do any of these roles in a British parliamentary debate. In fact, the most likely thing is that you'll be rotating through the roles. So let's say in round one, you are opening government. In round two, you'll probably be closing government or opening opposition or closing opposition. In round three, you do another role. In round four, you do another role. Because in British parliamentary competitions, the priority is to make sure everyone does different roles so that it is fair and equally distributed, okay? There are some instances where you might repeat a role, and that is fine because sometimes people who did the same roles in the past come to meet in a room because they all won their rounds, maybe, or they all lost their rounds, maybe, right? So it is not a must that you have to change roles, but it is very, very unlikely that you would repeat a lot of your roles. Most of the roles, you would rotate them. So in a competition, you do opening government maybe in round one, closing opposition in round two, opening opposition in round three, and closing opposition in round four, which means that as teammates who are doing the British parliamentary competition, you need to understand what each of the roles require from you. And that is why a webinar like this is very helpful, because I'm going to take you through what each of the roles are about. If you are Prime Minister, what are your responsibilities? Or if you are Opposition Whip, what are your responsibilities? So that if you are rotating through the roles in a competition, you would be able to know what is expected of you in each of the roles that you have. Okay, and so that is just one thing I wanted to put out there. I think I have seen some questions in the Q&A segment. Let me see. I would get to them in a bit. Great. So let's look at the speaking order. In the speaking order, we have first government, or opening government. We have closing government, opening opposition, closing opposition. Usually the easier thing here is that the first speaker of opening government, which is the Prime Minister, speaks first, then followed by the leader of opposition, who is the first speaker on opposition, opening opposition, and then followed by the Deputy Prime Minister, who is the second speaker in opening government, followed by the Deputy Leader of Opposition, who is the second speaker in opening opposition. So the speaker roles alternate all the time, which means you start from, just like you do other formats, maybe first prop, then first op, then second prop, then second op. Just that because it is British Parliamentary and they have multiple teams, that way it goes on for much longer. Okay, so there's Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, then to Deputy Prime Minister, then to Deputy Leader of Opposition, then Member of Government, because it goes back to them, they would come and speak. Then Member of Opposition would come and speak for their team. Then Government Whip would come and speak. Then finally, Opposition Whip would come and speak. Okay, so that is how it is done. This is a much easier depiction because it gives you which order in which they speak. So Prime Minister speaks first, Leader of Opposition speaks second, Deputy Prime Minister speaks third, then
recording in progress.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Deputy Prime Minister speaks fourth, then Member of Government speaks fifth, then Member of Opposition, then Government Whip, then Opposition Whip. Okay. So, great. Now let's look at the speaker roles and the responsibilities of each of the speakers. Because, like I said, you could find yourself in any of the roles that I've just described, because in British Parliamentary, we rotate the roles a lot. So what I will then do is to explain each of the roles to you and then be able to highlight why these roles are important and what you should do in each of the roles that you find yourself in. So first, let's talk about the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister, I would sum up your role in 3 simple steps. First, do a setup. A setup would mean, do you have any definitions to do? Do you have any clarifications? You need to indicate your team's stance on the motion or on the resolution. So let's say our motion is this house will ban the use of plastics, right? So we need to set up, what does a ban mean? What would we do when we are banning? Are there any punishments if somebody breaks the ban requirements or the ban rules? What is your stance? So just explain what the motion is, any definitions that you have, and what your stance is. But mainly, you are the person who is supposed to identify your team's main contributions. So tell the judges what your team's main contribution is going to be, and then explain your arguments to the judges. So for Prime Minister, judges are expecting to understand mainly what your team stance will be and the key arguments from your team. For opening opposition, you are doing probably similar. The only thing is that you have 2 extra things that you have the option to do. It's not mandatory, but you have the option to do. The first one is a clarification. If you think that maybe Prime Minister defined something in a very odd way or in a very unfair way that you disagree with, you can always challenge that in your speech as a leader of opposition. But I would say that for opening opposition as a team, if you have any challenges or if you have any disagreement with the Prime Minister's explanation of anything, please challenge it in the Leader of Opposition speech so that you don't end up leaving it for Deputy Leader of Opposition, because usually judges see that as being unfair, knowing that with the order in which we speak, it's Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, Deputy Prime Minister, then Deputy Leader of Opposition. Which means if you leave your clarification for Deputy Leader of Opposition, usually the opening government team has no chance of being able to respond to it, and that creates some form of unfairness on them, right? So if you have any complaints or any disagreements with their definitions or setup, challenge it in Leader of Opposition speech so that their Deputy Prime Minister can also have the opportunity to engage you or respond to you if they have any response to offer. But aside that, you also do your setup, which means you explain your stance. If you have an alternative or a counter proposal to their policy, so for instance, the motion I just used as an example, this House will ban the use of plastic bags. Maybe you don't want us to ban, maybe you want us to place higher taxes on plastic bags so that it's more expensive, so that for when people buy them, at least the government gets more money to deal with the waste issues. And so you can declare that as your counter model if you have one and if it's necessary. The other thing that is different for Leader of Opposition is you have to do rebuttals, okay? So you have to do maybe 1 or 2 rebuttals, which means some of the arguments that the Prime Minister set up, you need to at least have 1 or 2 responses for them before you go ahead and set up your main team's arguments and your contribution to the debate, okay? So for Leader of Opposition, you do the same things as Prime Minister, except if your team has a clarification, you have to state it, and you have to do some rebuttals before you do your arguments, okay? So those are the things. The only thing I would say here again is typically a British parliamentary speech is 7 minutes, 15 seconds long. Standard 7 minutes, the 15 seconds is grace period. Maybe your speech is up, so your 7 minutes is up, then they give you 15 seconds to wrap up. In Oxford schools, the speeches are 5 minutes, 15 seconds long. So you do not have to speak for 7 long minutes. But at the university level, at the World Universities Debate Championship and a lot of open competitions, they are 7 minutes, 15 seconds. So that clarification is important, okay? Great. Then we look at the deputies, which is the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now, the roles of these speakers are very, very similar, and so it is usually easier to address them. Even if you look at the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition, their roles are very similar as well, right? So let's take the Deputy Leader of Opposition and the Deputy Prime Minister. There are a few things that they're expected to do. Chief amongst them, which I would say from right now, is rebuttals. For deputy speakers, note that your first speakers do very little rebuttals, especially for Deputy Prime Minister, because note your Prime Minister didn't do any rebuttals because they didn't have anything to rebut from the opposition. So they just put out the arguments from your team. So as Deputy Prime Minister, you have to do a lot of rebuttals on behalf of your team, okay? So that at least your team can be noted for engaging the opposition team's case. But aside that, if you have any clarifications, again, you have to give them. If you have extensions, which means if you have different arguments to add to your team or to your partner's arguments, you can explain them as well. And if you have any clarifications or reframings to do, or comparisons, which are also clashes to do, to compare your team to be able to say, well, Op said this, but on government side, we are saying this, and that's why you should vote for us or you should award us the win. You have to do those ones in your deputy speeches, okay? And again, in Oxford schools, they are 5 minutes, 15 seconds long speeches. So that's mainly if you are in opening, whether Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, or Deputy Prime Minister or Deputy Leader of Opposition. These are the roles and these are the responsibilities that you have in any of these roles. It is usually advisable that speakers that are Prime Minister or Leader of Opposition, if you are choosing to decide on which roles to do with your partner, the speaker who likes to construct arguments and who is very, very good at a first speaker speech should do the prime minister and leader of opposition or leader of opposition. And speakers who like to rebut a lot or who like to respond to people a lot should be the ones doing the deputy roles because they do a lot of rebuttals. Okay. Then we come to the closing half, which is the member of government, member of opposition, and then we go to the opposition and the whips as well. Now, member of government, and this is what I want you to pay attention to, because remember, the opening government and opening opposition are also opening government supporting the motion and opening opposition opposing the motion. These two teams, closing government and closing opposition, are also doing the same thing. Closing government is supporting the motion, closing opposition is opposing the motion. So now, this is where you need to pay attention to know what is a closing government team required to do to make them different from an opening government team. And what is a closing opposition team required to do to make them different from an opening opposition team. Okay? So if you take opening government, they give arguments in support of the motion. Now for closing government, the first thing you have to do is to create a distinction between yourself and opening government. A distinction here doesn't mean that you do not support the motion, because both of you are bound to support the motion because you're on the government side. But what you have to set up right from the start is to explain what different reasons do you have to support the motion that opening government doesn't touch on. And so, for instance, in the motion example that I was using, this house would ban the use of plastics. If opening government says, well, plastics should be banned because we are not able to dispose them of effectively, and they are causing pollution and they are blocking of drainage systems. So we should ban the use so that we are able to deal with all these problems. Maybe closing government, or as closing government, you need to think of different reasons why we should ban this. One of them could be, it is not really that plastics are being disposed of in a very terrible way, such that they are clogging drainage systems. Maybe there's a good and healthy there's a good and healthy management of plastic waste for recycling purposes, but you've come to find out that a lot of plastics actually cannot be recycled. By the time they go through one phase of recycling, the next product, once they are done using them, you can't recycle them anymore. So you've come to realize that recycling, which is the solution to try and deal with plastic waste, is failing, and so you need to ban it because there is no other means of using plastic in a sustainable way. That is a different reason from the reason that opening government gave. And so in British Parliamentary, if you're a closing team, you are always forced to think deeper and come up with reasons that are distinctively different from the reasons that your opening team gave. And for me, that is one of the most exciting things about the British Parliamentary format. Why? Because it challenges you to think. It always pushes you to think of more reasons, to think of different layers of explanation, different layers of analysis as to why something should be supported that is different, entirely different from what your opening government is explaining as their reasons for supporting the motion. Okay? And so once you are a member of government, right when you are starting your speech, you explain why that is different. What is different from your stance or your reasons for which you are supporting the motion compared to that of the opening government. And then you do your setup, which means you also do your explanations and your arguments, and you provide those arguments to the judges. If you are a closing team, typically your arguments are called extensions, right? Because we see them as extending from the same stance of the opening government, but we want to see them as a different argument or as a different set of reasons why something is being supported. Okay, so that's opening member of government's role. There's a similar role for member of opposition. You set up your stance when it comes to why, or different sets of reasons why you oppose the motion compared to what opening opposition said. You give some rebuttals, you identify your arguments, and then you explain them to the judges. So for both member of government and member of opposition, there is one key role that you cannot fail to do. It is that you need to explain what are the different arguments you are presenting to support or oppose the motion that is different from what your opening team have explained. Okay? And so it is a very, very interesting thing. It means that if I give 3 reasons as opening government why we should support this motion, as closing government, you should also come up with 3 reasons, but the 3 reasons should be different and usually should be much more convincing and much more compelling. Okay? Because remember, if you are a team in a British parliamentary debate, you are not only competing against one other team, you are competing against 3 other teams. Which means if I'm closing government, I'm competing against opening government, opening opposition, and closing opposition as well. So your reasons need to be very strong and more convincing than opening government, but also be strong to rebut opening opposition and closing opposition. That way you can win. It's the same for all the other roles. Let's say you are in opening opposition, your reasons have to be strong enough than closing opposition's reasons so that you are beating closing opposition already. And you have to be able to rebut opening government and closing government effectively before you are able to win the debate. Okay? Always remember, the speeches for Oxford schools are 5 minutes, 15 seconds long, but for standard British parliamentary debate, it is usually 7 minutes, 15 seconds long. So finally, let's talk about the whip rules, the government whip and the opposition whip. Now, this is one of my favorite speaker roles to do in British parliamentary debate. I loved being the whip speaker because I like rebuttals and I love rebuttals and responses to people. But also the fact that I could listen to the entire debate and be able to now share my thoughts and my contributions on it. As a government whip or as an opposition whip, you are the second speaker to either the closing government or the closing opposition. Okay? Which means there are a few things that you have to do. Chief among them is rebuttals. Remember, the extension speakers, which is the member of government providing the extensions or the new argument for your team, or the member of opposition who is providing the extensions or new arguments for your team, they usually don't have enough time to do a lot of rebuttals. And note also that at the time they are speaking, Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of Opposition, 4 people have already spoken before them. So if member of government is speaking, they cannot have the time to respond to everything everyone has said. If member of opposition is speaking, they cannot have the time to respond to everything. So if you are a whip speaker, your primary responsibility is to make sure that you are doing every single rebuttal that your team has to do. Because once you are done speaking, there is no other opportunity for your team to speak. Because of this reason, there is no responsibility on the whip speakers to provide any new arguments. In fact, the new argument you provide as whip speaker is usually ignored because nobody can respond to it, because nobody can engage it, therefore we don't credit it. So if you are a second speaker or if you are a whip speaker in a closing team, do not bother to present any new arguments. What this means is 2 things. 1, it means that if you have any ideas about the motion or about the topic, tell your first speaker about it so that they get to present that argument in their first speaker's speech or in their member speech. Because if you do not do that, when you say it as a second speaker and it's an entirely new argument, the judges would ignore it and not credit you for it, because your primary responsibility is to do rebuttals and responses. The second thing is, obviously, you can explain your team's arguments better. Maybe you can clarify some things. Maybe you can reframe or identify the main contributions, or you can explain to the judges what is your main stance. Maybe you think they don't get it or they've not gotten it yet. Okay, you can do that. But always make sure that these are things that your first speaker would have already spoken about, and so the judges know that this is your team's contribution and you are only explaining it better. but you cannot come and speak or discuss an entirely new argument. Okay, so that's very, very important. And so these are the speaker roles, from the prime minister to leader of opposition, to the deputy speakers, which is deputy prime minister and deputy leader of opposition. Then we came to the extension speakers, or the member speakers, so the member of government and the member of opposition. And finally, we've discussed the whip speakers, which is the government whip and the opposition whip. It's always very exciting to be a whip speaker. A member speaker is also very, very exciting as well, because you get to listen to a lot of the speeches before you speak. So these are the speaker roles that we see. I can see 6 questions in the Q&A section. I'm trying to open it. Okay, I would definitely be able to access it in the end. So the final thing about British Parliamentary, and hopefully I'll be able to address all the questions, is what you call the points of information, okay, or POI. Now, points of information it's not found in all debates. Some debate formats have them, some debate formats do not have them. British Parliamentary debate is one of the debate formats that have what you call a point of information, okay? It is basically somebody getting up and raising their hands to ask the speaker who is giving their speech a question, or to ask them to share an opinion that maybe undermines their case, or to ask for clarification on what they are explaining, okay? But there are certain rules around it, just certain basic rules around it, that we need to go through when it comes to British parliamentary debate. So first, I've just explained what point of information is. So it can be a correction, it can be you asking for clarity, or it can just be a plain question to the speaker. And there are a few things. POIs are offered after the first minute or before the 6th minute of every speech. So remember, I said a standard British parliamentary speech is 7 minutes. So you can only ask someone a point of information after the first minute of their speech or before the 6th minute of their speech. We consider before the first minute and after the 6th minute, which are the times you can't ask POIs, we consider those times protected times. So if a speaker is now introducing their speech in the first minute, you shouldn't be able to interrupt them. So that's a protected time. If a speaker is concluding their speech after the 6th minute, you shouldn't be able to interrupt them. So that's a protected time. So similarly, if you have a 5-minute speech, like in Oxford schools, we do before the first minute is protected time, and after the 4th minute is protected time. So if you are doing Oxford schools debate, you can ask POIs after the 1st minute or before the 4th minute, okay? Now, they are only offered by the opposing bench. So even though, for instance, opening government is competing with closing government, when Prime Minister is delivering their speech, closing government cannot ask Prime Minister a POI because you are all on the same bench, okay? But opening opposition and closing opposition, both of them can ask Prime Minister a POI, and that is absolutely fine, right? And so that's the difference. That's the only clarification or restriction that is there for points of information, which also goes the same in the reverse. If an opposition team is speaking, only the government teams can ask that opposition speaker a POI. Somebody from the opposition side cannot ask an opposition speaker a POI, okay, even if you are not on the same team. Now, POIs have to be up to 15 seconds long. So there's a strict time on it. We don't want you to get up and for you to ask a question, you spend 1 minute asking the question and you've just consumed or wasted the speaker's time, because that would be unfair. So we've limited the number of seconds that you have to ask a POI. And so your POIs are usually 15 seconds long. What this means is it is advisable that sometimes you write your POIs down, very, very brief and concise. Once you are accepted, you just get up, read your POI, very short question, and then you are done, okay? But one final thing is it is subject to the speaker who is speaking, to whom you are asking the POI, to either accept the POI or reject the POI request. So, for instance, Prime Minister is speaking. Leader of opposition has a POI. Leader of opposition would typically rise up and go points of information. They would ask it out loud. Or sometimes they would just raise their hands, and that also indicates points of information. The Prime Minister who is delivering the speech can right away accept, yes, you can ask a question, or could say, hold on, I'm not accepting you now, because probably it's not a good time for them to accept a POI. Okay, so even though you are asking a POI, it is not mandatory that that speaker accept you the moment you ask the POI. It's still up to their discretion to either accept your POI or decline it. Speakers who are speaking can also pause and request for POIs. So maybe you don't want people to disrupt you, so you say, I have 5 minutes to speak. When I speak for 3 minutes, I'm going to pause and ask if anyone has any POI. So typically a speaker could speak for 3 minutes and pause and say, before I move on, any POIs from opening government or any POIs from closing government. If nobody has a POI, the speaker is free to move on. If someone has a POI, the speaker takes that person's POI, answers it, and moves on. Okay, so POIs are not rigid that once it's requested, you have to accept it. The only caveat to this is it is advisable for you to accept at least one POI in your speech. Okay, it is very, very important because you wouldn't want to be seen as not engaging the other teams. So it is always advisable that you accept at least one POI in your speech. Okay, awesome. Then final points about POIs. These are just quick things that I want you to note. These are tips I share with all students that I coach as well. 3 things to do when it comes to POIs. First, accept at least one POI. And it makes you look bold, right? The thing about debates is it's also perception. We want judges to believe that we know what we are doing. We are bold. We are ready to answer the questions and we are ready to debate the questions or the topic. So if you ask POIs and you don't take any of them throughout the speech, sometimes it sends the wrong signals as if you are scared. Okay, so take your time and accept at least one POI and answer it confidently, and you send a very strong message that you are really prepared and you are very comfortable to deliver that speech. The second thing is, once you accept a POI, at least allow the speaker to finish their POI before you interrupt them, unless they exceeded the 15 seconds timeline. Because sometimes in the heat of the moment when you are debating, you accept a POI, and once the person starts the question, you think you can already predict what question they're about to ask. So you go like, yeah, it's okay, shut up, let me continue, it's okay, you are disturbing. And that sounds rude, and it doesn't make the debate nice anymore because now everybody starts to be rude to each other. But once you accept a POI, always make sure that unless the person is speaking for too long beyond the 15 seconds, allow the person to end the question, you listen to them clearly, and then you answer the question. It also helps you because I've been in a situation where somebody was asking a POI, I didn't let them finish, and I cut them off and answered, but apparently the question I answered was not the question they were intending to ask. So later on when they came to speak and they asked their actual question, I had wasted my time answering a question they weren't asking, and I lost that debate. Okay, so it's not good at all to cut somebody because it looks rude, but also it affects your ability to answer the questions properly. And then answer the POI convincingly. Be bold, don't be shy, don't look scared when answering any of the questions. 3 things to avoid when it comes to POIs. Do not dismiss them as unimportant. So do not say, oh, that's not really important, so I don't care. Even if you think it is not important, explain why it is not important so that the judges are convinced. Do not accept a POI in the middle of stating a sentence. I would always say, do not be given a sentence and don't conclude and pause and just accept a POI, okay? Because it makes you look disorganized. Conclude the sentence. Sometimes conclude the argument. Take a quick pause, like a 5-second pause, and go, yes, I'm ready to take your POI. So you are composed and effective in answering your POI. And do not rudely interrupt a speaker while they are offering a POI, like I said. So now I will take a few questions which I've seen around. Let me start Um, First says, how many POIs can you ask per person? There is no limit on the number of POIs you can ask per person. You can ask as many POIs. Usually, the only thing is that the speakers who are speaking would obviously not accept all the POIs that you ask, but you can ask anytime you have a POI, you can raise your hand and ask. If you are lucky, they would accept you, you get to ask your question. Okay? But I would say that knowing that speakers don't always accept all your POIs, as a team, be strategic in what POIs you offer. So maybe they've said 4 or 5 things that you don't agree with, but which of them is the biggest thing that their team stance is depending on? Ask a POI that questions that main thing, so that even though you don't maybe get another chance, you've probably questioned the most important thing for them. Will answering each POI slightly increase your favor with the judges? Yes, usually it does. Answering POIs effectively. In fact, I know people who have won debates, and according to the judges, the thing that convinced them the most was the answers that they gave to POIs. So it is very, very important that you're able to do that. Will you lose the debate if you do not support a POI? No, you won't. The only thing, support doesn't mean you do not accept the POI. You won't lose the debate if you don't accept a POI. The only thing that would happen is if maybe accepting the POI would have helped the judges understand your stance better, you'd have lost that opportunity then. So sometimes it just goes against your own interest if you do not accept a POI. Okay. Says, is there a system for the rotation, and how many rounds or rotations are there on average? So it depends on the rounds, the number of rounds in the competition. Okay. So for instance, Oxford schools, the regional rounds is typically 3 rounds, preliminary, and then a semi-final and a grand final. Standard online British parliamentary competitions are like 5 rounds. Okay. And then the World Universities Debate Championship is 9 rounds. So it depends on the number of debate rounds that you have to do at the preliminary stage and the number of rotations that you do. But typically, you rotate rows on a diagonal basis. So let's say if you do opening government, you do the diagonal next. You do closing opposition next. And then maybe you do opening opposition and then do the diagonal closing government. Okay. It's not always like that, but usually that's the pattern that you see. So depending on the number of rounds, you just keep rotating until the rounds are done. What do people usually debate about? That's a brilliant question. British parliamentary debate, and one of the most exciting things about it is that there are no restrictions on the topics that you do. You can do economics, politics, art, entertainment, history, law, environment, government policies, so many things. There are it's endless, right? Which means that usually for British parliamentary, you have to be a very good and wide reader. You have to read a lot of things. You have to be interested in every single thing that you see out there, because you don't know, the next competition, that could be a debate topic, right? And it's very, very exciting because sometimes some random things that you read all of a sudden help you form very beautiful arguments in competitions, and it's so exciting. So what it also means is that regardless of your strength, it's a place for you to thrive because you definitely have things that you are interested in, since there is no limitation on the areas or topics that you get to debate on. Can you give some examples of rebuttals? So rebuttals, that's the question though. But rebuttals are like responses, okay? So for instance, if I say, let's ban plastic bags because they are polluting the environment, someone could give a rebuttal and say, but you don't have to ban plastic bags to deal with pollution. You can educate people to dispose them off properly. You can give people incentives to recycle the plastic bags, and you can improve the sanitation situation in the country without banning the use of plastic bags. So a rebuttal is a response to question whether or not what you are saying is true or is right or is logical, okay? What to do if opening team says all your points and you are closing? This is a brilliant question. If you are closing and opening team says all your points, sometimes life happens. We can't win all the debates. Sometimes you probably want to be second. Sometimes you want to be third, okay? You just don't want to lose and get 0 points. So if you are closing and you realize that your opening is a very good team and they've said all the things that you plan to say, There are two pieces of advice I would give you. The first one is make sure that you rebut the opposing teams very, very well, because now you don't have a lot of time to spend on new arguments. So rebut the opposing team. Spend a lot of your time rebutting the opposing team. Okay? So that they are weakened, and then it's like your government bench is beating them already, so they are already losing. And secondly, you try and explain the arguments that opening governments have explained better. At least tell the judges that you're explaining it better. Okay, and then it's up to the judges to decide. Usually, that strategy means you probably get a second, and opening gets a first, and at least you don't lose everything. Is there a grace period after being asked the POI or rejecting a POI? No. So once you receive a POI and the speaker asks, your time resumes immediately after the speaker asks. So you have to instantly be able to respond to them. And again, that is one of the beautiful things or skill sets that British Parliamentary helps you develop. It means that you are able to think on your feet, and it helps you generate a lot of these responses instantly. Are there any tips to give the best POIs? Usually I would say ask a question. Okay, what do you think about this? Or if you had this situation, would you do this? Okay, so in the same example I'm giving about banning plastics, I could probably say if cars also cause accidents, would you say let's ban all cars then? I'll probably ask a POI like that. And my implication or my logic about it would be, yeah, the fact that something has negative consequences doesn't mean we always ban it. Sometimes we find ways to solve it. Okay, and here there's maybe waste management, recycling to deal with it. So always ask a POI in a question that is direct so that the speaker can clearly answer it. Only the upsides can say POIs. No, all the sides can ask POIs. So if you're on government side, you can ask POIs to the opposition teams when they are speaking. If you're on opposition, you can ask POIs to the government teams when they are speaking. So it is vice versa. Okay. Is it possible to prepare for a POI? Usually it is. Also, one thing that I would highlight here for POIs, sometimes you're asked a POI and you can't respond to it instantly because maybe you really don't have an answer for it. It is fine for you to say something like, yes, I've heard your POI, but I would like to finish my speech and my partner would address your POI in their speech. That is only if your partner is yet to speak. If your partner has already spoken, then you are the last person speaking in the team, so you definitely have to answer the POI, okay? But if you have your partner who is yet to speak, you can always say, my partner will address the POI, and just move on with your speech. When you finish and you go back and sit beside your partner, the two of you can put your heads together, think about the response for the POI, and when your partner is speaking, they would say, well, opening opposition asked my partner a POI, here is the response for it. So it is a teamwork. You don't have to carry all the burden on your own. Okay, it's very, very important. In Sea Change Education, do you help the child in debates? If yes, then how? I don't know what you mean by helping the child in debates. Is this as in helping them prepare or giving them arguments? It depends on the type of debate. So British Parliamentary is impromptu, which means I'll talk about one aspect of it in the latter end, but it's impromptu, which means you don't know the topics, you are only told about it, and you have typically 15 minutes to prepare and think up arguments and present your speeches. And so what that means is that you do not get any help, okay? You don't get any help from anywhere. But if it's a research-based competition where everybody is given the topic like weeks ahead of time and your coaches are able to help you to prepare, yes, if you're a Sea Change student, your coaches are available to assist you prepare for the competition, and make sure that you are ready to deliver your best. How long before the debate do you get the topic? Just 15 minutes before. Another thrilling aspect of British Parliamentary. You always have to be ready. You always have to have ideas. You always have to be able to think on your feet to be very good at this competition format, which means it's a challenge to a lot of people to be your best selves and be very, very sharp in how you think up ideas, and that makes it exciting and thrilling for a lot of people. Is there a standard speech structure for speakers in BP debate? Yes, there is. Very soon I'll talk about the camps that we'll be having, and how you can join for some of these specific and much more detailed trainings. Can closing team just summarize the points of the first few speakers? Yes, you can. You can do that as a closing team, but you just need to also, like I said, do your main responsibilities. Let me go through a few more questions and then I would resume so we can wrap up. Is there any specific structure that is best that you see to win debates? Any specific structure that is best? Debate structures are usually very, very situation dependent, and so you need a lot of coaching and experience to be able to determine what strategy to use at which time. Because sometimes it's good to do your rebuttals before your arguments. Sometimes it's good to do your arguments before your rebuttals, for instance. And so, just to give you an example of it, let's say if a speaker, let's say if opening opposition has spoken and you are closing government, and opening opposition has explained something that directly contradicts your argument that you want to make, first you would want to rebut that claim that they made so that you clear that out of the way before you make your claim, okay, so that it's clear for the judges to award you a win. If not, and you don't rebut that claim that they made and you just argue, it's like, yeah, the judges know that there's a conflict there and they are now stuck in between who is really winning this argument. They can't really tell. Should a soft line case be used? Is it compulsory to answer a POI? Like I said, it's not compulsory, but it's advisable that you do so. For those who don't know what soft lines are, which means you don't really debate the motion that you are asked, I wouldn't say do that. So for instance, the motion says this house will ban the use of plastics, then your stance is, yes, we allow people to use it, but would make them pay fines. That is really not a ban. That is just you punishing people, or that is maybe you putting a penalty on it. So don't take soft lines. Don't be mischievous or disingenuous. Debate the motion and the debate stands as you've been given it. Okay. Final rules on who wins. Before they begin the debating, teams are typically given 15 minutes to prepare their arguments. Now, this includes any research time. So there is usually teams are not allowed to use the internet, but sometimes you can come with, let's say, a research book or maybe notebooks that you've written notes in them that can help you. So generally, if you are going for a British parliamentary competition, specifically for Oxford schools, the regional round, for instance, we put out a list of topics that the motions will be coming around, and you have the opportunity to read, compile notes on these topics. And then when you come to the competition, if you get any topic or any motion that relates to any of the notes that you have, you can always refer to the notes, but you do not use the internet. And each speaker is typically given 5 to 7 minutes to speak. In Oxford schools, it's 5 minutes. The final thing to note here is that a judge or a panel of judges would rank the teams. There are 4 teams, so a panel of judges would rank you from first to fourth. Okay? The team that is first gets 3 points for that round. The team that is second gets 2 points. The team that is third gets 1 point. The team that is fourth gets 0 points. Okay, so you'd always want to aim to win so that you accumulate more points and then you are able to rank higher among the teams in the competition. Okay, so now that we are here, we are done with the rules of British Parliamentary. I would move on to the sea change pathway. Let me see if there are clarifications provided for motions if the team is confused. Yes, because you are not allowed to do research, teams are allowed to ask the chief adjudicators or the people who announce the motion questions or clarifications if you have any. So for Oxford schools, it's an online competition. We announce the motions on Zoom. It is not a webinar style, so it's an actual Zoom call. You can unmute and ask a question. I have a clarification you can ask, and then we give you explanation for it, okay? And how are teammates paired? Typically, you find your own teammate, and then you register. So you have to register with someone. For Oxford schools specifically, you have to register with someone from your school because it's a school-based competition. So you cannot register with someone from a different school. Okay. But there are some open competitions, for instance, Cambridge BP, that you can register with any friend of yours who is interested in doing British Parliamentary, and you can debate. Okay. Okay, great. So now we are getting to the end. Let's have some fun experiences with the Sea Change pathway. So this is the part where I'll talk about the Oxford Schools competition that's coming up, and you get to know all the details about how to get to Oxford and the regional rounds and the competition itself. And so stay tuned. Let's get through this very, very quickly. At Sea Change Education, we have 4 steps to experiencing British parliamentary debate. So first, there are 2 BP camps or debate camps where you get to learn much more detail about British parliamentary. Today, what I did is just introduce you to the concept and all that. But if you join our camps, you get to learn how to construct, for instance, a prime minister's speech, how to ask the best POIs. We give you debate experience where you do the rounds and you get feedback, and you're able to experience what a British parliamentary debate is really going to look like even before you go and do the competition. So we have the introductory BP camp, which is 4 lessons, which would happen in October, on 4 Saturdays in October. And the key thing is this is for people who have never debated in BP before. So you get to go through every single stage of the introductory camp, okay, and experience all the basics. And then in November, 4 Saturdays in November as well, there's the BP Mastery Camp, which is advanced BP strategies and advanced BP techniques. So someone asked the question, if you have an opening team that has argued all the things that you have in mind, how do you beat them? There, I would get to teach you exactly the best strategies to use, which are used at the highest levels of British parliamentary debate to beat the strongest teams that you meet to be able to progress within these competitions. Okay, sometimes all you need is the right strategy and the right coaching to excel, regardless of the competitiveness of the teams that you meet. And then after the BP Mastery Camp in November, there is the Hong Kong Regional Round in December. Okay, so we have the Hong Kong Regional Round for Oxford schools in December. So the registrations for that is open. I will share the links with you soon, alongside with the registration for the camps as well. And you register for that and you do the competition in December. Now, after we do the competition in December, top 2 teams from the competition would get to progress to the Oxford final day round in Oxford in March. Okay, last year I was with the teams. We went to Oxford in March. They did the finals, the event, and the trip was very, very educative, and it was a great experience for them as well. So this is the pathway for Sea Change through the Oxford and the British parliamentary channels. So about Oxford Schools Debating 2025 for the regional rounds, they will be happening on the 14th and 15th of December 2024. So it's a 2-day competition on Zoom, very, very brief. 3 preliminary rounds on the 14th, the semi-final and the grand final on the 15th. And note, because this is Hong Kong regional rounds, even though the regional round opportunity is open to anyone across the world to come and participate in, it is exclusively Hong Kong teams who would be selected to attend the competition in Oxford, because this is the only slot that Hong Kong teams have to attend the competition in Oxford. And so what this means is that the top 2 Hong Kong teams from the competition get the opportunity to attend Oxford Schools Finals Day event in Oxford in March. Okay, but for the regional round, anyone can participate in. You can participate from China, from Malaysia, from Japan, from Philippines, and win the competition and put it on your CV. That's fine. Obviously, there are a lot of schools from Hong Kong who are also going to be participating and competing. They could also win the competition. That's fine. But when it comes to the 2 teams that are attending Oxford in March, they are the top 2 Hong Kong teams from the competition. So that is really, really important. Okay. So this is like a quick view of some of the experiences from last year, not from last year, still this year, from 2024 Oxford Schools Finals Day. And so this is the famous Oxford Union Chamber. It is known to have hosted historic debates, some debates even dating as far back as to the World Wars, and some of the world's most important decisions being made there after public consultations were made. So it is a very, very historic chamber to walk into as a debater and as somebody who wants to take debates to the highest levels. And it was really exciting being there and experiencing it. These are historic architectural buildings. There were a lot of them on the Oxford campus as well, and you'd see them and you get to take a lot of pictures and you get to walk through them. So there were several times where we went around as part of the team, just experienced these buildings, walked around, saw the campus, and went through to learn a few things. Then there is the Oxford Library. It had endless number of books. We spent hours there. I specifically spent hours there reading through different books and different sections and different experiences. And it's like you probably never even wanted to leave because it's a library that gives you endless options about the amazing books that you could read. And one thing I had to do, for instance, was all the books that I wanted to read that I couldn't read, I wrote down the titles. So I'm chasing them one by one and buying them or looking for their soft copies so I could read. And it's a really, really enjoyable experience and a very memorable one for you as a student as well. And finally, this is much more fun because we went to the Divinity School, which is one of the places where Harry Potter was acted. And it's one of the halls in which they acted some scenes in Harry Potter. And when you go there, they talk to you about the scenes that were acted there and some histories that are written there. And it was so surreal and very, very exciting looking at all the scenes that we've seen and how much we like Harry Potter. And you go there and see, oh, Harry Potter was acted here as well. There were some art museums that displayed some old books that were very, very exciting. So there are so many things that you get to experience when you go on the finals day. And it's a really, really unique opportunity. And I would definitely encourage you to sign up for it and compete in the regional rounds and get the opportunity to go for finals day if you get the slot to do so, because it would definitely be a memorable experience. And so for Oxford schools, this is what the calendar looks like. What we are doing here today is the introductory webinar, and so that is complete. And then we have registrations are open from now through to through to October, November, but mainly the registrations that you need to do as quickly as possible. Register for the competition because the slots are limited, but also register for the BP camps. So there is the introductory camp, which is 4 lessons that you get to do a lot of practice, a lot of drills, but much more in-depth coaching. And because the class size is limited to 10 students, I get to pay attention to each student's needs and get to answer a lot more questions in a much more targeted way. This setting is a huge number of people, so it's a little bit difficult to pay attention to everyone. And then we have the mastery camp in November, 4 lessons as well. And after you experience the introductory and the mastery, you are very good to go. If you think that you already have introductory knowledge about British Parliamentary, don't worry, you can always register for only the mastery. If you need both, you can register for both as well and get to experience the training, the development. The goal of these camps is that at the end, you should not just be able to compete in Oxford schools, but any BP competition that you want. And they will also give you the good foundation that you need if you want to do debate at the college level and compete very, very well. And then in December, we have the regional rounds. Right after the regional rounds, and we get the teams that are doing the Oxford schools in March. We do finals training towards the finals day. So I would coach you, I would train you throughout, and then we go to Oxford in March. Okay, so or you get to go to Oxford in March. So that's really the timelines. But I just also wanted to share this with you. One more competition that you can look forward to is the IPDC 2025. It's a 6th edition. In December, there would be a camp online, mainly after Oxford schools, there will be an IPDC camp. That competition uses the American Parliamentary format. And it's friendly, very, very friendly, because we have the upper primary, the lower secondary, and upper secondary, which means if you have siblings that are in primary school, they can also sign up if they are interested in debate as well. And the competition will be in February 15th and 16th. And you also stand a chance, if you perform really well in the competition, to join us or to join the team that we present for the US Nationals. So this year, Sea Change was in charge of assembling a team with a team of students from Hong Kong to represent Hong Kong at the US Nationals Debate Championship, which happened in June. It happened in June 2024. Next year will be June 2024 as well in Iowa. And so if you do very well at IPDC, I'm always there looking out for bright talents to recruit into the US Nationals team, and you get an invitation, you join us, we go to the US as well in June. So imagine you could go to Oxford in March and also go to the US in June if you really perform well. And so there are opportunities up for grabs, and look out for it as well. So this is where we are. I would leave this screen on after I talk about it, and then I would answer your questions, because this is the registration. This is the link that will take you to the registration page. So the link allows you to register for both the competition and the camps as well. Now, one important thing for the BP camps, if you register before 2nd September, which is between today and tomorrow, if you register before Monday, you get $500, 500 Hong Kong dollar discount. And so you can scan it now, scan the form, scan it, and maybe save it, share it with your parents, get to register as quickly as possible, and get the 500 HKD discount quickly before it gets away. Once it's Monday, it goes away, and whoever registers after Monday has to pay the full price. But also know that it is a limited class. It is just 10 students per class. So sign up as quickly as possible before the slots go away. And then we can then look forward to your trainings and development in October and in November as you gear towards being a very, very good British parliamentary speaker. So I'll leave this here for you to sign up. You can take a screenshot as well. And then let me go and answer a few questions in the Q&A section before I return. So let me see. Great. Where can we get the link? I've just shown the QR code, so you can scan it as well. How to be well prepared for the debate? Is it just by reading? I wouldn't say it's just by reading. I would also say practice a lot. So practice is very, very helpful, which is one thing that we'll be doing a lot at the camps. But hey, you can practice by just debating with your partner. That's also good practice, okay? And ensuring that you are sharp and active, but also do feedback. So if your partner delivers a speech, did you think they were convincing? If they weren't, tell them that, oh, this didn't really convince me, or the example didn't really convince me. And then they also give you feedback, and you get to improve as well, okay? What if your argument doesn't make sense? Will there be a second person to explain what you said? So you are in teams of two, so you always have a partner, right? If you are the first speaker and your argument didn't make that sense, or you think it's confusing, your second speaker has the opportunity to explain it. But what I would say is that as a speaker, always make sure that by the time you are done speaking, you wouldn't need someone to come and explain what you said again, okay? Because that way, you also give yourself the responsibility to improve as a speaker and as a debater, because we do debate as an activity to improve and to become the best speakers, or part of the best speakers the world has seen. And so we cannot allow ourselves to be comfortable with not communicating properly, right? So I would say always take up that task on yourself. What is the age range for Oxford Schools BP competition? It is 12 years to 18 years. So when you open the registration form, you definitely see the details there. It's 12 years to 18 years of age. Yeah. Where can we get the link? I've shared that. Where's the link for the regional round? I've shared that again. Can registration open today for those interested? Yes, registration is open today. It's open now, so you can register before Monday, and then you get the $500 discount for the camps, okay? So that's really important. Yes, bullet points on cue cards is also an optional way to write your speech in BP. It's very accepted, okay? BP is very flexible on that, so you can write your bullet points so far as you're able to explain them really well. Can we just skip the camp and join the competition? Yes, you can. If you have enough British parliamentary debate experience and you cannot join the camp as well, yep, it's fine to just join the competition. I would say if you can't join the camp, always do so. especially for the mastery camp if you have experience, because then over there we get to do look at the mistakes that experienced British parliamentary debaters do, or how to get to the next level and become part of the best debaters that British parliamentary has seen. Okay, okay. Um, will we lose favor if we look at the cue card too much? No, I don't think you would lose favor. I would only say that, especially if you have cue cards, then it means that your speech is not really that explained on the cue card. So you should be able to look up and speak and explain things for everyone to be persuasive. Generally, what I would say when it comes to debating is that the goal is to be persuasive. Okay, so if you look at your cue cards and it's making you less persuasive, then that is how it hurts you. But no judge would consciously say, you are looking at the cue card, so I'll punish you. That's not rules in British parliamentary. But if by looking at it you are not being enthusiastic enough, you are not persuasive enough, then maybe that might affect how your speech is scored. Okay, so I would always say that, um, look more towards being persuasive and practicing how to be persuasive. Okay. Okay, great. So I hope everyone has scanned this now. Let me share the link for this in the chat space as well, so that in case you did not catch, wait, give me a second, in case you did not catch the QR code, you can always look at the link as well. Then that should be good to go. Okay, so this has been a really, really informative session. I'm really appreciative that you all joined to get this information. So this is the form in the chat space as well. As you scan, I hope that by the time I'm done, I would see a lot of you already registered, and then we get to start preparing towards Oxford schools and getting our chance to attend the finals day in 2025. Okay, so just a few things. I noticed that a few of you had some questions about sea change when we started. So just a few things in terms of sea change and the things that we do. We have a complete pathway for, like I said, from the age of 5 to 18, and we have different layers of programs that are able to help you. So we have debate programs, we have model UN programs, and also we have trainings for higher level debaters, like from the 12 to 18 or varsity team debaters who are becoming competitive. Aside Oxford schools, like I mentioned, we also go for the US nationals, and we are working on some other competitions that would be very helpful and much more exciting for you as well. So if you want to take a class with Sea Change, if you want to join us, usually what we do is we take an assessment for you. So we can't just plunge you into any class that you'll be uncomfortable with. So one of our teachers books, and you book an assessment. One of our coaches has a quick 30-minute chat with you, gets to know your interest, your level of debating, which class will be best suited for you. And then they recommend a class for you, and then you join, and you're much more comfortable in your development as well, because then the class that you get is suitable for you. So you can definitely reach out to Sea Change. If you want to take an assessment, you can scan this QR code right here, screenshot this screen and this page, and reach out. Like I said, mainly follow us on our social media platforms, on Facebook, on Instagram. You can also search Sea Change Education on Google. You definitely see our website, and you'll be able to reach out to us and interact with us as well. We look forward to not just you experiencing our competitions, but also eventually experiencing Sea Change as a whole and as an organization, and you definitely love the experience that we'll provide for you. I've answered all the questions I've seen so far. So if you have any final questions, I believe this would be the time to ask them, so that I would be able to provide answers for you, and then we can move on. Are the debate topics based on current trending or hot topics? Yes, sometimes. And so, for instance, but current trending or hot sometimes because they have to be relevant topics. So sometimes we know there are certain things that are trending on social media but are not really relevant topics. But for instance, the Olympics was a good one. The Olympics is a very huge thing. And so you can get some debate motions on the Olympics because this is an Olympics year, okay? And that's a very relevant topic that was hot and trending, right? So just something around that. But also generally, if you look at the most important issues in the world now about climate change and global warming, peace and security, politics and policies, maybe economic situations, poverty, how to deal with those things, maybe access to education, AI and technology, another huge part. So these are topical areas that debate topics or motions likely come from, okay, because they are hot. Where did you become so skillful in debate? And wait, and where do you learn about debates? This is probably a much more personal question, but I got into debate 6 years ago when I was in the university, and I got to do a lot of competitions, and it's really helped me a lot. That's why I'm very passionate about it. I'm into debate coaching full time now. So I hope to get to meet some of you or all of you in various debate coaching camps and competitions and help all of us develop, okay? Would the topics always be about recent issues, or would there be topics on issues in the past? Some topics, some issues will be on topics in the past, but I would always say that these topics are ones that are accessible, which means they are topics that are easy enough to understand. Okay, so no one would ask you, especially at Oxford Schools level, no one would ask you something outrageous that you cannot debate. Okay, most of the time they are topics that you know about and you can relate to. Okay. What is the age range of IPDC? What does it stand for? IPDC is International Parliamentary Debate Competition. And the age range, usually we register for IPDC in class levels. So it's lower primary, it's upper primary, lower secondary, and then upper secondary. So with your kid being 11, I'm sure if they are in an upper primary class, which is likely, definitely they can join IPDC. Okay, yeah, and because they are 11, they cannot join Oxford schools. That is correct. The level might be too high for them, but still they can join the camp, the BP camp, get to experience the camp as well for the introductory level and get to build on their debate skills in anticipation for IPDC. Which is prioritized in BP debates, matter, manner, or method? BP debates prioritizes all of them. Probably the most important will be matter, prioritizes content more, but manner and method helps you become very persuasive. So you need all of them to win debates. Don't put yourself in situations where you are prioritizing one more than the other because it might cost you and you don't know which one your judges prioritize more as well. So my advice is always do all of them right so that regardless of what the judge cares the most about, you are always ready to win. What happened if we got the topic chosen that we don't know how to debate? You can always ask for clarification. So you can ask the adjudication team or the team, whoever announced the motion, to clarify, to help you understand the motion. They won't give you arguments, but they would at least give an explanation that helps you understand and help you make sense of the motion, and then you can go ahead and prepare for the debate from there. Okay. All right. So once again, you can reach out to us on social media, but this has been a very helpful participation. You'd receive an email from us tomorrow on Monday with, again, reminders, the registration links as well. And then hopefully I'm looking forward to all of you registering for the camps. I would keep sending reminders to you for you to register for the camps if you need to, and this would help. Final question here, and I'm not going to answer any question anymore because we are on our time. How long will be given to make points for the camp, for the competition? Oh, you have 15 minutes. So after the topic is announced, you have 15 minutes, which is why if you are not used to the format and you'll be participating in the competition, or even if not this one, but you want to participate in British parliamentary debate, it's very good to come for the camps because there we do drills, we do practices, but also I get to teach you specifically what to do in prep to help you come up with your points in 15 minutes, because that is the most difficult aspect of British parliamentary. You are not allowed to use the internet, you're not allowed to use AI, but how do you get your points ready in 15 minutes? Those are the things we'll be learning, especially in the introductory camp. And at the advanced level, we get to do a much more advanced British parliamentary prep to help you and become some of the best debaters we've seen. Okay. So thank you very much for joining this webinar. The recording for the webinar definitely will be shared with you via a thank you email that will be sent out. But first of all, thank you from me, from Sea Change, and from everyone who works here. All the best to you all. I hope to see you at the camps, and I hope to see you at the regional debate competition for Oxford schools as well. So bye everyone. Thanks for joining.